Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup, where divas and Al ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. This week is November 13th, 2022, episode 33 coming at you. We have a special guest this week. Greg from CWIC Media is joining the program again. We had a great time with him last summer, and we're excited to have him again today. We're going to discuss some topics like why do people leave the church and what can help them come back. Also, the BYU Women's volleyball team is facing a boycott, and FairLDS has responded to the LDS Australia tithing scandal. So we're going to go over that. If you'd like to connect with Alan Dives, you can always meet us at www.mormonnewsroundup.org or send us an email at collab@mormonnewsroundup.org. Of course, it goes right to the top. We're also on Twitter and YouTube. So thank you very much for joining us. And let you know, Dives is hiking Mount Rogers in Southwest Virginia this weekend, but he'll be back for next week. And also, I guess with no further ado, I need to bring on Greg. Greg, how are you doing?
We're rocking and rolling. Doing well. We are, we're approaching, I think we're approaching now about 40,000 listeners on all of our venues combined.
Wow.
And we are, a lot of things. I've got a book I'm about to finish up here, get that out and published here soon. And then we've got a lot of things planned for next year. So, yeah, we're doing well.
Sounds like things are going really good. You got a lot of good projects there. So how's the Change.org petitions going for you?
That went real well. I mean, it's still up there, but we've pretty much wrapped that up. I think we had about, at the time we had about 5,200 signatures on that for, it's what we call an awareness document, not really a petition, right? But an awareness document just to get that out to the people in charge of BYU and just to let them, give them a little bit more information on things that are happening. And this is mostly from parents and students and others that have had certain experiences with certain professors at BYU. Okay,
that makes sense. So, all right. Now, you also do some live events from time to time. What are those about? Can you fill us in on that?
Yeah, so we do a couple of different types of speaking events, and sometimes they're mixed together. But CWIC Media has the what would we call it? The gospel study side of it, where we focus on, and that's the name of the book that I'm doing is the interpreters. But we focus on these interpreters that I've developed on how to understand the scriptures a little bit better. And so we do a number of events where we go out and might focus on one or two of those interpreters and teach people how to study a little bit different than they may have done in the past. And then on the other side of things, we focus a lot on building testimonies and navigating the waters, the ever-increasing flood waters of the philosophies of men out there. And learning how to contrast and separate the differences between a lot of what's happening in our cultural shift right now as compared to what is gospel-centered and anchored in eternal principles.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it sounds like you're on the cutting edge of some real groundbreaking things, so I'm excited to hear about that.
Yeah, it's fun. One more thing, by the way, is we also do a number of we'll do speaking in front of legislatures. So we've done a number of state legislatures and smaller government bodies as well, where we've gone and kind of gone through the explanation, especially when it comes to education, the K-12 space, on things like critical race theory and critical social justice and identitarianism. So that's another big part of what we do in public speaking.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, anything else that you'd like to share with us about Quick Media or about your personal life or religious background before we begin?
Uh, no, I don't think so. I'm a lifelong member of the church.
Hmm.
Studied gospel my whole life, and just I feel a need to support it and to I wouldn't call myself an apologist. I don't think I
Hmm.
kind of fit that narrative of what an apologist might be.
Hmm.
But I'm a faithful member of the church, or at least I try to be, and I want to see the church do well, and I want
Yeah,
church members to do well.
yeah. Something else I really admire and respect about you is that you are a very intellectually authentic and honest person. So that's why we're really glad to have you on here. You give us a really good perspective from the faith, the faithful side of things. So we're certainly glad to have you this week. All right. So, Greg, do you have our Mormon News Roundup joke of the week for us today?
Oh wow! I racked my brain for this. I'm not a funny guy, and so it was tough for me. Hopefully, you haven't heard this one
All
before.
right.
But what did King Lamoni say to Ammon?
This is a new one. We haven't had this one before. I have no idea. What did King Lamoni say to Ammon?
Could you give me a hand?
I like it. Well done. Okay. We got a couple of follow ups from last week. BYU football is on a bye week, so they're going to be playing Utah Tech next week. We also have Mike Lee has won re-election for the state of Utah, so congratulations to Senator Lee for getting another term in office here. Um, is he the second most powerful Mormon in government? Possibly. And I wonder what the secret of his success is. Any thoughts on that, Greg?
Uh, do I have any thoughts on it? Not a lot. I don't. Here's the thing. The way I work with politics,
Mm-hmm.
I'm very much a federalist in the sense that, I don't really get involved with other people's elections, and I don't understand. I honestly don't understand the hoopla over, even if it's your own party. I don't really care. For the way I look at it is, I'm grateful to live in a republic and a democracy, and for I'm not in Utah, is what I'm saying. I don't live in Utah, so I whatever the people of Utah choose, I'm glad they have the choice, and they choose better or worse. Is up to them. I don't. I don't. I just don't get that invested in those things. I know a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
do, but I kind of, even like with governor, I don't understand why some people are like rooting for certain governors of
Uh-huh.
other states. What does that have to do with anything?
Oh,
I don't know. But
I gotta
I can
say,
understand with the Senate.
yeah,
Sure, I understand that makes a difference, and you've got to. I don't
sure.
know where we're at as of today, but I think it was neck and neck on who takes control of the Senate. So I
Hmm.
kind of get that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't. I think it's great that we have members of the church that are in high public office. So I hope we can have more. And but outside of that, not really anything else to comment on Senator Lee.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that pretty well matches up with my view on politics. Is that I mean, really living in the state of Utah. A lot of people say, well, if you live in the state of Utah and you don't vote Republican, you're just throwing your vote away. But also if you live in the state of Utah and you do vote Republican, I don't understand the difference. Because it seems like we're very heavily leaning toward the red over here. So, but I completely agree with you on being thankful to live in a republic where we elect people to represent our best interests, and then we have the ability to reelect them or to vote them out come next election. So,
Yeah,
good
that's
thoughts.
how I
Good
feel about
thoughts.
it.
All right. This is going to lead us into our first article tonight. It's a kind of big one. This one's coming from FairLatterdaySaints.org. This is the response from Trevor Holyoke to the let's see, the Sydney Morning Herald. That's the name of the newspaper that broke the news last week. And so this is the response to allegations about the church not paying their fair share on the tithing that's been donated in this country of Australia. It looks like this was actually written by Paul W. Hess on November 4th, 2022. So, essentially what they say is that the Sydney Morning Herald made a lot of allegations about the church not doing its fair share in Australia. And they're also saying, well, this is not backed up by any kind of report or any kind of, what would you call it? A reference or a citing. They just are making accusations that this is not really on the up and up. And, on the one hand, I get what they're saying. On the other hand, I'm also saying that I think I said it last week when the Sydney Morning Herald broke the news that it just kind of feels icky, even if it is completely legal. But it sounds like, the way that the church runs, the church is very much in line with abiding by the laws and also using loopholes and the flexibility of the law to bend it in their favor however they can, as often as they can, as we all do. This isn't anything against the church itself. This is something that every person from the top to the bottom tries to exploit the system however they can to their own benefit. So I thought it was really interesting that they said that there's no citations or no actual quotes or anything, no evidence to really back up the allegations. What are your thoughts on that, Greg?
Yeah, that's what I noticed as well. I don't, if they had some document in their hand that outlined exactly what was going on, and there was a problem, they had evidence that there actually was wrong play here in this, then fine, then that would need to be addressed. But I didn't see anything like that, and the church has got a big target on their back. You had the leak. What was it? A couple years ago, year or two ago, that the church has it was over $100 billion and $150 maybe billion, and or maybe it was more than that. I don't remember, but it
was about $150 billion as I recall.
Yeah, $150 billion dollars, and in their fund, and truth is that's probably only a portion of what they have, and I'm all for it. Great. I hope that fund grows immensely. I hope it continues. It's a rainy day fund to me, no pun intended on Noah's Ark there, but it's like I want them to have that, because there's no organization for me where I'd rather see that a steward over that sum of money. No investment firm, no other church, no organization that I would rather see in charge of those funds, because I know that they pretty much align with what my values are. And, let's be honest, they're pretty stingy about things.
True.
And so you're going to see, here's the way I am sometimes with charities. I'm very careful about when I give money to charities, because, oftentimes you actually look through the paperwork and you can see there's 70, 80, sometimes 90% of the funds that you give are going to overhead.
Yeah.
And that can be production, that can be man hours, that can be, real estate, whatever.
Yeah, administration of the charity.
With the church, just because I've been in the church my whole life and I know how they run, and I would say that number is probably the exact opposite.
Yeah,
with the money actually going to where it's supposed to go, and that's in their humanitarian efforts, that's in their bishop storehouse efforts, that's in building temples. I know a number of the contractors who worked on temples. I know what they have to go through to try and get the dollars down and make things work, and it's. I think they've just got a big target on their back, but I'm all for it. I hope it goes to $1 trillion.
Yeah. So the question I had is, do you think that the church visibly does enough, or could they be a little bit more, what should I say, maybe promoting the efforts that they do give?
So here's what I noticed. When they started doing the kind of between the general conference hours, they give kind of a world report, and
Yeah.
They go over and they start showing what they're doing, and those could be missionary efforts, but there's also an awful lot of humanitarian efforts that they have there. And then you notice in this last conference they talked about the money that they've given, and they never used to do that. I think they don't think it's the right thing to talk about, right? We don't want to boast about doing these things.
Yeah.
And now when they do talk about it, now they don't really. I feel like no matter what they do, they're going to get attacked. And so now I think they do speak of these things a little bit more. What I wish was on those areas that there was more transparency. I wish that in the reports, and maybe there's something I don't know about, but if they had at least, they don't need to divulge all their investments or their assets or anything like that. But if they actually had the spending somewhere easy to find, the spending, and maybe add in man hours and volunteer hours and other things like that on their humanitarian efforts, and even on their bishop storehouse, that would be pretty cool, right? That it's like, okay, I can look this up and I could see all the time that members have put in. They can put an assumption on that, and a reasonable guess, and then put in the dollars that have been spent on these things. I wish there was more transparency on that side of things. And so I think when you put transparency out there, I think you have fewer problems.
Yeah.
And I think the church has learned this in some ways in the hard way, right? Where they ended up eventually putting out these essays that they had in 2012. And it'd be nice if they were ahead of the curve on those things. I think the transparency would be refreshing if they put that out. But I do think that they have at least move toward that a little bit more than where they were.
It seems to be the direction that they're leaning, and I'm glad to see that, because I'm with you that the transparency is something that other charitable organizations really has done a lot better job on than the LDS Church. But I can understand why, and I hope that the church will continue to be more transparent as it goes forward. Let's see, scrolling down the article, there's a few claims that the Fair article attacks that were made by the Sydney Morning Herald. The first one, the Sydney Morning Herald claimed that the Global Mormon Church has overstayed the amount it gives in charity by more than $1 billion. Apparently to make itself appear more generous than it actually is. But the counter argument to this was that, well, there's no reference to support it. So they don't really, they're making a claim, but they're not really backing it up with anything. They're not saying, well, where does the church make that claim that it has done that? Or, where has the church ever stated how much it gives? And also not to mention or not to fail to mention that a lot of the donations that the church makes claim to are donations that are done in service hours and in missionary work and these other kinds of efforts. It's not just dollar for dollar. This is also, hour for hour as it's valued. The second claim was, in addition, the church runs a $100 billion tax-free investment fund, Ensign Peak Advisors. We've already talked a little bit about that, because that's, this is how the church is being good stewards. They're trying to grow that rainy day fund the best that they can. Sure. So,
well, again, the issue here is, like it said, it says here the claim is that they're using it to stockpile cash and investments. Okay, I don't feel like, what happens if there's a massive turn in the economy?
Yeah.
What happens if war breaks out? What happens? You're talking about a global. Look, how much cash does Apple hoard?
Exactly.
How much cash does Microsoft hoard? For what? Well, there's reasons to do that. There's both financial reasons, depending on interest rates and inflation and a number of other things, investment opportunity, and then there's simply we may need it. We may need this, and so I have zero problem with them hoarding cash and investments.
Yeah,
I don't think that's a problem. I think it's, again, I lean to them to think, and it's not like they're going to be perfect with it, but I trust that they're going to do their best they can with that money.
Yeah, for sure. So then we go on to claim 3, and claim 3 is the one that I really take some issue with, because the claim is that Mormons are required to pay 10% of their gross income in tithing, a significant financial impost on followers. And so Nilsson said this was hard on poorer Mormons, particularly in developing world, describing it as an extremely regressive tax. And the Fair article says this claim is undeniably false. I guess, tithing is certainly a free will offering, but if you're going to be a member in good standing, if you're going to be a card-carrying member, part of the temple recommend interview is paying a full tithing. So
that's true. It's voluntary as long as you don't care about going to the temple.
Yeah, exactly. Right, Greg? so
once you decide you want to go to the temple, it's no longer just a voluntary thing anymore. But I don't. There's two sides to this. One is they're trying to tie this together with the fact this is the implication, right? Look, the church has so much money, and yet here they are asking 10% from their poorest members. That's the implication, and it's true. It is true, but the implication is malicious. That's malicious. Yeah. And that's where I think you do have to go back to the root of this. It is voluntary. No one has to do this. Mm-hmm. Now, if they want to go to the temple, then yes, you have to do it. Why? Because the temple is for those that are sacrificing in many different ways, mm-hmm. And are willing to live a certain life and abide by certain covenants and obeying certain commandments, and that's one of them. Mm-hmm. It's not the only one. That's a hard one for some people. Perhaps there's others that are very hard for others to follow.
Yeah,
and to be able to go to the temple. I mean, you can look at LGBTQ individuals, and they may have a tougher time abiding by certain things, or it's the temple is for those that want to follow the covenants, and regardless of your circumstances. It's regardless of your circumstances.
Yeah.
So to say that this is a regressive tax, I'd say the opposite. I think it's fair because it's a percentage. It's fair for everyone. And yes, it might be a little hard on the poorest of people, but it's also an opportunity to grow. That's how I feel about it. And that's a hard thing for some people to understand, but I think it's true.
Okay. Yeah. So going on to the fourth claim here was that they said that the church has been rerouting a lot of tithing funds through shell companies in order to qualify for the tax-free status that it has, and while its members, unlike some other countries of the world, Australia, tithing money and charitable donations of that nature are not tax deductible, so they're still taxed. So I guess the claim is that the church is having its members taxed at a higher rate than the church itself is being taxed, and it seems like a lot of the argument that this Fair article has is saying that, well, we don't have any evidence of this, and once again, they're just making claims without showing us any facts to back it up. So
yeah, this one I don't know as much about. I mean, if they're talking about shell companies, as in things that would be like Deseret News, Deseret Book, Bonneville Communications, Ensign, I don't know, but or if there's other offshore accounts, I have no idea.
Yeah,
I'd be very surprised if there is anything with as much money as runs through their hands there in the church. I'd be very surprised if there is anything that was certainly purposefully used to evade taxes. It's not legal.
And
But
that's
I just don't know enough about what they mean by the shell companies.
yeah, and that kind of brings us to the conclusion of this article is that really we don't know, we don't have the facts, and so there's a lot of claims that are being out there. As you say, the church has a big target on its back. So I think that the Sydney Morning Herald, I think that they have a good eye for news, and I guess we'll see how this all plays out because maybe there's things that they have or knowledge of or evidence of that was not disclosed in the original article, and that's a possibility. So I guess we'll just wait and see how it all plays out in the end. All right. Any other thoughts on that article?
Just the last thing there, I do see that the whoever wrote the article for FAIR here did exactly. They put in a couple of numbers that is exactly what I was saying about trusting them over other charities, and they say Australia specific LDS charitable trust fund brought in 100,211,000. It distributed 131,604,000. And it spent $7,810 on overhead.
Yeah.
And the reason is because they rely so much on volunteer work from the members.
Yeah, for sure. And I like a lot of the donations that they factor in to that money is like the missionary efforts, couple missionaries and full-time proselyting missionaries, not to mention service missionaries as well. Goes into those numbers too.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So the next article.
This podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Signature Books, www.signaturebooks.com. We invite you to check out their latest book written by Romney Burke, which is entitled Susie Young Gates, Daughter of Mormonism.
Brigham Young had over 50 wives and 56 children, but none has better name recognition than daughter Susie Young Gates. She lived from 1856 and died in 1933. Yet she, like so many women of Mormonism's past, has remained a mystery to most church members. In Susie Young Gates, Romney Burke, the author, paints a portrait of a strong woman who rose to prominence within the church, fought for the rights of women throughout the country, yet dealt with personal trials and her share of heartbreak. We have came off of Facebook, Latter-day Saints United, the Facebook page. And so then it links to an article that's a blog article, My Life by gogogoff.com. The title is The 4 Reasons People Leave the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and How to Help Them Back. So you've probably seen this floating around social media, this article. They list the 4 reasons why people stop going to church and 4 solutions to help bring them back. So the first reason that they give is that they slip into inactivity, or they just stop going. They like sleeping in on Sunday morning. They get lax in their scripture study. So it's just pretty easy to just get out of the habit, or to get out of the schedule, and then their advice for how to help those who have slipped to come back. They said that this is the easiest group to get to come back, because all you have to do is just welcome them back. Just invite them to come back to church, and they'll come and they'll feel happy and welcome again. So that's the first one. Second is they take offense. So the second main reason people go less active is that they take offense to something that somebody might have said, or something they heard. And he said this one's a little tougher to help them come back, but the way that you help them come back, and he says is very specific, that you have to get the person who did the offending or said the offensive thing to apologize and recant, because even if it was not intentionally given, you can't apologize on behalf of somebody else. It's just not going to work. And I think that he's right there, that if you're going to apologize, you can't apologize for somebody that is not repentant, Let's see. And then the third issue, or the third reason, is they take issue with church history. So, they've read into some things or come across some things that they don't like. And then how you help those who take issue with church history come back. This is where it starts to get even trickier, because the way that you help these kinds of people out, it's a lot easier to rescue them by seeing where their sources are coming from and helping them to understand that you can't judge the past by the present's morals, and that you can help them to just proceed with faith, that faith will cover whatever problems that they may have with the history of the church. And let's see, he also gives something that, let's see, there was a person that he knew who he calls him Jason, and he had a discussion with him. Jason's somebody who left the church over issues with historical fact, or the historical findings, and then made his way back. And he says that regardless of what the history is, if the church is true, then that's the only thing that really matters. So it's not important to have the history line up or match up. As if the church is true, then the history really doesn't matter, and really nothing else does either if the church is true. The last one is they take issue with doctrine. So this is something where they don't like the teachings of the church, they don't like the beliefs of the church, and this one, he says there's a couple of courses that they'll take when they decide that they don't agree with the doctrines of the church. The first course is they'll go non-religious. They'll just leave church altogether, not just the LDS Church, but all churches. They leave Christianity. They leave, and a lot of times they'll leave theism altogether. So not only do they throw out the bathwater, they throw the baby right along with it. The baby Jesus, that is. The second course is that they become antagonists or anti-Mormons, right? So then they'll start attacking the church and trying to speak out to those around them to help them to see that the church doesn't align with their beliefs, and so therefore the church must be wrong. He said that these ones are the toughest to get to come back, because a lot of times what it involves is having to convince the person that the church is right, even if we don't agree with it. And the things that we disagree about the church, we need to give it time and allow it to grow and to progress. And a lot of times we'll see things come out in the wash. So this article this article was a little interesting to read over. What are your thoughts about this one, Greg?
First of all, I'd want to know what the author means by leave the church. The 4 reasons people leave the church. When you say you leave the church, that to me is usually a conscious decision and you're not coming back. You're deciding you're not coming back.
Yeah, there's a big difference between just stopping attending on Sunday and having your records removed, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I do think these are 4 good reasons, or they are 4 reasons why people would go into inactivity and or leave the church. I don't think that they're the top reason, but they are. I just did an episode on this on the podcast about a week ago, not on this article, but
the topic
on why people are leaving the church. For me, it has more to do with identitarianism.
Okay.
And critical theory, and so it's the LGBTQ issues, and it's critical theory. We're moving into in our culture is moving much more into a position of oppressor versus victim.
Yeah,
and so when people are especially younger people that have been in universities, they're almost always going to be brought into critical theory to some degree or another, and it's hard to not view the world that way when you are subject to that a lot. And if you adopt it, then everything is going to have an oppressor and a victim, and eventually you're going to turn to the church. You're going to see a bunch of old white men running the church, and all of a sudden they are the oppressors, and it runs all through the. I don't know if everyone knows what intersectionality is, but it runs through the intersectional ladder, where you're going to have, your race, sexual orientation, gender, etc., are going to be divided, and so the numbers that I've seen, going all the way back to the Pew Survey, the Religious Pew Survey of 2014, and then coming up to now, are all, the whole trend is moving toward that identitarian and critical theory area of why people are actually leaving the church.
Okay.
And to me, it's the philosophies of men. I talked about at the beginning. One of the reasons I do, one of the things I do with public speaking. And so I think that's what's really gaining steam, and it's really the larger problem. I wanted to talk about the last two the most here. They take issue with church history. I'll give an example of this also on the identitarian side of things. It used to be, when I say used to be, I mean yesterday. It used to be that church history was the primary issue for people that were really leaving the church, like, I'm done with the church. And to some degree it still is, but especially if you're older. But if you're younger, the identitarian issue has overtaken that.
Yeah.
And so, as an example, let's say if you were reading the church essays and you feel like there's a problem about Joseph Smith, translating the plates through a hat and a seer stone, or the blacks in the priesthood, or polygamy, or any of these issues, and you just take those as themselves, and if people have a problem with those things, then you say, okay, well, they had an issue with church history. But now the filter of identitarianism is put over that. So for example, now Joseph Smith is a sexist and a misogynist, right? And Brigham Young was a racist, right? And the church leaders and prophets are oppressors, and they're all white, right? So it's that's what becomes the bigger issue now, and then it leads to all of the other church history issues that critics of the church try to bring up, but that's just kind of gives you an idea of how things are shifting. Even church history is viewed through an identitarian lens now. Yeah. And then lastly, church doctrine. That to me is the toughest one, because it's hard to say how do you need to be. Very few people really know their own doctrine in the church, and so it's hard when people bring up issues and maybe you don't even know about certain doctrines, and so that I think is a tough one. But overall, here's a study I saw that taking all of these things into account. It's not why people leave the church, but it's why they come back.
Okay.
And that study showed that the issue is a relationship with God. So the reason people come back, the number one reason they come back, is because they missed their relationship with God. And those people may still have an issue with church history. They might still have an issue with identitarianism. They might still have an issue with doctrine. It's not like they're gone, or they may have been offended by someone. It's not like that didn't go away. But they still missed the relationship with God, and that's usually initiated with prayer or something hard in their life. Yeah, that turned them back to prayer, and they felt they needed that relationship with God. So where there are reasons to go away, I think the number one solution to all of these things, while there are other solutions that can be offered here, I think the number one issue here or solution is, can you help someone build a stronger relationship with God?
Well said. Greg, I gotta say that I think you would have written this article much better, just from hearing your perspective there. So, yeah, that pretty well sums it up. But this article also takes us down to our Mormon News Roundup poll of the week. This is available only on Anchor, so go over to our Anchor page and take a look at this poll. So, Greg, do you want to do our poll this week with me? I'll read off the question, and then if you would you mind reading the answers?
Hold on, let me get to the right spot here. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, it's down toward the bottom there. Okay, why do people leave the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Is it 1?
They just want to drink coffee.
Hashtag Lucifer's Bean. Number 2.
They found out about the tunnels under the conference center. Hashtag, what are they hiding?
I don't know that anybody's leaving the church over that, but okay. Number 3.
They miss 3-hour church.
Some people maybe do. Maybe they've just got too much time on their hands on a Sunday now. Or number 4.
They tried to read the Book of Mormon, but kept getting bored on the Isaiah parts.
That's possible. Number 5.
They really wanted that second ear piercing.
Yep, just wanted it so bad. Number 6.
They followed David Archuleta on Twitter.
Or could it be number 7?
And number 7, they didn't subscribe to Quick Media. I'm pretty sure that's the answer.
Yep, I'm going to go with number 7 too. So, yeah, go over to Anchor and give us your opinion and take our poll. On to our next one. We've got a report that says 60% of LDS missionaries are coming home early and 80% of Mormon young adults are leaving the church. Is that exaggeration, or what do you think, Greg?
I couldn't hear you there. I think you left me.
I'm sorry. Are those numbers exaggerated? The 60% coming home early and 80% leaving the church?
Well, normally when I would first look at this and I see the source for this,
the exponent,
I would say they're probably very exaggerated. But unfortunately, at least on the young people leaving the church, or it's not exaggerated. I know that. The numbers that I've seen are pretty concerning. This would be for inactive members. So whether they've left the church, you could say, like fully, or they're just not going, whatever it might be. And, if you're from ages 18 to 30, that number is right around 82 to 83% are not at church. And that is corroborated by a number of different things that I've seen and people I've talked to.
That's really shocking for me to hear, because honestly I thought that the numbers were exaggerated when I first read this. I know that we've heard of a lot more young missionaries returning home early from their missions, and I can understand why on that, because missions are brutal. It's very difficult for especially a rising generation that's been very much coddled and praised and cushioned throughout life, to be thrown out onto the streets, literally, to go door to door and have people scream in their faces or turn them away or reject them. I mean, they've never had any kind of rejection before in their lives, and so obviously that's going to take a toll on them mentally. So yeah, you do see a lot of young missionaries coming home early. My own nephew, he made it out to the mission field for a week and then turned around and came home. He did, but I think we're also seeing something else come about as a result of this, and I see it as a positive thing. We're starting to see a rise in service missions, and that's what happened with my nephew. Is he came home early from his proselyting mission, but converted it over to a service mission. So he still gets to stay in his familiar surroundings and serve his local community where he's at for the next 2 years. So I see that as a positive way for the church to help out these young missionaries.
Sure. And then there's other questions as to, because it's odd, right? Because the missions in the past have, let's just say that they've become easier and easier and easier. right? There's
Oh, yeah.
times in the church history where a mission was 3 years long. Other times it was 2.5 years.
Yeah. And you had to
went
support
a year and a
yourself
half for
all
a
the time.
while after 2 years and went back to 2 years.
Yeah.
And, now you can call home every week and there's a number of things and, fine, but it's just odd that then these things seem to be ways of helping missionaries, but do they? I don't know the answer to that. And our missionaries, for some reason, not as prepared. Does social media somehow not, is that become too addicting? Is it too hard to leave behind? I don't know what the reasons are for, if this is true. That's a number I don't know anything about missionary numbers. So if that's true, I think that's very concerning, because it's not just the missionary program. You're talking about the youth of the church that are not having the opportunity to go through those leadership experiences and spiritual experiences for a longer period of time and build more of a foundation for their lives. And even when you're just talking about something practical, even outside of the spirituality of it, the ability to help strengthen your life and to have success, I think you learn those types of principles while you're on your mission.
Yeah, absolutely. So without the sacrifice, with no sacrifice, there's no growth.
Correct.
And that's something that how else are you going to teach that to the younger and rising generations? There is going to have to be some discomfort. There's going to have to be some suffering involved in order to get that kind of growth. So Can
I just quote something real quick?
Please do, Greg.
This is why I always look to the source of what you're looking at here. And yes, the 80% is more or less probably true. I don't know about the 60%, but here's just a quick paragraph on this. These 60 and 80% of young adults are screaming in a language that male power finally understands. Numbers. Maybe I am being too optimistic, but these numbers seem to illustrate the decay of the world men have shaped and created. The patriarchal world, the industrious, hierarchical, exclusive, destructive world that men have built has never worked for the majority. So it's just to understand what your sourcing is.
Yeah, that's some pretty strong claims to be making, for sure. And I don't know that I can agree with. Keep in mind, this is an article that was written by somebody who goes by Lavender.
Okay.
So, that says a lot to me too.
Yeah.
All right. So the next article, Stake Conference, Spirit, Glory, and Grace, or Fried Froth Drivel Disguised as Dessert. This one is from By Common Consent, and this article is interesting. John C. posted this one, said that he's been encouraged to. He's taking an interesting approach here, where he's kind of disengaging with the church for the time being, but when the church asks him to re-engage and to come and take a new calling or to come back to the church, he says not yet. He says the church isn't quite where he would like to see it be yet, but this is obviously a church that's growing and learning, and if the church comes in, this John C. sounds more like the kind that we were talking about, that he's just going to wait and see if the church starts to align with his ideals and his beliefs, and then he'll start coming back. So,
right,
yeah. He's just not feeling fed with any substance when he goes to stake conference, and that title where he says it froth and drivel. That's what he describes being fed at stake conferences, that you're not really getting anything of substance. And so I guess that's fair if that's his opinion of it. I'm not sure what he's expecting to get there. But he does mention that there's a lot of big issues that are not being addressed, and that's fair to say too. But once again, does the church really want to air its own dirty laundry to its members? Sometimes it makes sense to address it. Sometimes it doesn't. It's one of the things we've already talked about that on this episode, even where
Yeah,
sometimes,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. It's going, and the reasons of this guy's listing are again those identitarian issues mostly, right? I mean, he's saying not yet, right? But it's blacks in the priesthood. It's the policies of the LGBTQ, the kids of the LGBTQ couples, same-sex couples.
Yeah.
That's there. The other one that is mentioned here is that the church hasn't repented of its systematic dismantling of women's autonomy in reduction to the satellites of some men. I just see that's critical theory. That's oppressor or victim. It's so hard not to view these things when you are pulled into that critical theory world. It's everything. You're a hammer and everything is a nail. And but the question is I think one of the questions that's posed then is does the church do more harm than good? And I think it does all good. I think it's well, I shouldn't say all good. I mean, there's obviously mistakes and problems here and there.
Yeah, there's certainly people harmed, but yeah.
I think that it's just a matter of assimilation. And do you want to assimilate to what the gospel preaches or not? And everyone has their choice. Agency is a wonderful thing. Everyone has a choice, and sometimes that's hard for people to let go of. But everyone has their choice to say, yeah, I am going to follow the prophet, or I am going to go along with the gospel principles, or I'm not. And you know what? To some degree, that's okay. The plan of salvation is built off of agency. People have to be able to make their own choices.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I feel, some people get mad at others if they leave the church, or they're, I understand if, you have a family member and that separation is painful and things like that, but you've got to allow agency to take over here. And if you want it, you want it. If you don't, you don't. And again, going right back to that idea of the relationship with God, I think that's the key. If this guy here, John C., is worried about all of these things, I don't think he's as worried about his relationship with God. That's just the way it seems to be. I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but
no, that's a fair thing. That's a fair assessment of the article, as far as I read. Yeah. He seems more concerned with the church's public image, with the church's lining up with the rise of woke culture, and so yeah, I can see that there's a lot of dissonance there. So he's making his choice, just like all of us make our choice.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And I want him to be able to make his choice, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I want him to make his choice. You make your choice, and I'll make mine, and I will try and influence. But and he's obviously trying to influence here by posting this publicly.
Sure,
that's fine.
Yeah, that's what all of us are here to do, to try and figure this out, right? So go on. Do you have anything else on this one, or are we ready for the next one? Because the next one, the next article is kind of makes me chuckle. Okay. So the next article goes to latterdaysaintmag.com, and we've seen these guys ask the hardest family question several times, and we've had some real lightweight milquetoast questions in the past. This one, I think they've tipped to the opposite end of the spectrum. The question this week is, how do I help my wife become more physically affectionate? And this is by Jeff Sturrer from November 3rd. And so he goes and says that his wife and him have been married for quite a while. They have, let's see, they have a daughter. She has a daughter from a previous marriage, and he has a good relationship with her. They're also expecting a child of their own in the coming months, so there's obviously some sort of physical affection going on. The problem is that his wife doesn't really like to be touched. She's not real touchy-feely, and I guess he is. So they're trying to figure out how to make this happen. How can we get more physical affection into this marriage. And actually, I gotta say that I think that the answer was pretty decent. They suggested that they get into counseling, see if they can figure out what it's stemming from, because his wife, not only does she have a very staunch LDS background, she also comes from Southeast Asia, and her parents they drilled into her very strongly, that you don't have any relationship with boys. Well, it's very difficult to go from a culture of don't ever let anybody touch you to saying I do, and then on your wedding night, just being able to turn it on. So, yeah, that's kind of the problem that she's struggling with. And they suggested they get into counseling and help her figure that out. So, for once, I thought this was a pretty decent question. It was a tough question, but one that not too many people would share on a public magazine like that.
Yeah, I'm glad they did. I mean, I would say most marriages struggle to some degree with this.
Yeah.
There's, and by the way, I am certainly not an expert on this. So I want to make that very clear, big time disclaimer on all of this. My wife would be rolling over here, just like laughing at me speaking on this. But I think, it's. I think most men are going to have a little bit of this issue with their wives. It's some a little, some a lot, and then every once in a while there's a handful on the other side where it works the other way around. Mm-hmm. But I think that must be a part of marriage. That must be a part of something that we're supposed to learn, and try and figure out and accommodate. I mean, so much of marriage is sacrifice and trying to accommodate your partner, and so much of that is driven by hormones, on both sides.
Yeah.
It's just driven by hormones. And I think that's the first thing to understand. I've been married a long time, and that's one of the things I think I had to really try and step back and realize, both on my end, okay, I'm driven by hormones, and then on her end with things that she needs, right, are also oftentimes they're driven by hormones.
Yeah.
And for me, when I think of it that way, it's easier for me to work through solutions. Mm-hmm. And just say, okay, well, this is, her body is helping to, is telling her something, and my body's telling me something. And so that's something that has helped me just to think in those terms a little bit.
That makes sense. That's a good way of looking at it.
And then, but as far as somebody putting this online, I think it needs to be discussed more. And it's funny in the church. I think and this is not necessarily the way it is outside of church, but inside of church, women talk about sex a lot more than men do. Right. That's my observation. And in talking with a number of individuals, women are going to talk about sex a lot more than men. They don't talk about it typically. And so here's an outlet for this guy to at least put something out there, because he probably doesn't want to talk to even his friends about it.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to throw his wife under the bus, so to speak, either, so it's an outlet for him to be able to talk about something that it really is a problem for him. I mean, most men feel love and respect through sex, right? And most women need to feel loved and respected and secure and taken care of and loved before they can have a good experience with sex.
True.
Right. So men feel more of those things through sex, and women, most women, a good experience, a sexual experience would be something that's more of a result of already feeling those things.
Yeah. for sure.
That's my expert take on this, of course.
Well, I think that's a really fine take when it comes to the discussion that the article had and the answer that was given. Yeah, this is something that is, it's obviously in no way the wife's fault that she's dealing with as much as she's dealing with.
Right.
From such an upbringing that's very different from this writer. So yeah, this is, I think those are really good ways, really good advice too, Greg, on how to have a good, healthy sexual relationship, is to understand each other, understand your hormones, understand that those hormones are telling your body something. Yeah. And, sometimes it's very difficult to overcome that mindset that's been drilled into you over and over and over again since childhood. And, still gets drilled in from priesthood meetings, I'm sure. And that's probably why the priesthood holders don't really discuss sex that much at church. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But,
when I say in church, I don't mean at the church buildings. I just mean inside of, church members.
Amongst themselves. Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other thing I will say is I think it is really, the counseling part, I think, is very important for them in the situation.
Oh, absolutely. This is something that they're both going to need some help to overcome this and to work through it. But I think they'll be able to. It sounds like they have a really good marriage other than that. It's just, once again, something that they're not quite lined up on, that will need some adjustment. I think they're going to do fine.
Hey everybody, it's D-Bays here. Thanks so much for listening to the Mormon News Roundup. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Allow me to explain. Anchor has the tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. It's everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. So download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
The next article takes us over to wheatandtares.org. And we've got, the question is posed, does the church make people better or worse? This is from Angela C., dated November 9th, 2022. And she brings out some of these things about, should we say, right-wing politics, or rather right-wing extremist politics, where you've got things like the Proud Boys that are, marching around and, or you got the KKK spewing hate speech and things like this. And so the question's asked, well, is this a lot of times these people consider themselves Christian as well and consider the beliefs that they have to be in line with their Christian ideals and with their political leanings. And she asked that question, are these people becoming more and more cruel because of their political and religious beliefs, or are they just cruel people that have found a place where they can unleash that cruelty? We talked about this in our coordination call quite a bit, you and me, Greg, and I think that we had some really good points about this. That, people kind of are people themselves. And a lot of times you'll get people that don't necessarily affiliate with any particular denomination of Christianity, and they have a Bible on their shelf, so therefore they call themselves a Christian, but they don't read it. And, some of these people, you can tell they don't read it because they probably can't read. But then they go out and they spew a bunch of hate speech in the name of religion or in the name of politics, and that's just not really the truth. So you're getting people that claim to follow the teachings of Jesus Christ because they, believe the adages that aren't found anywhere in the Bible, things like the Lord helps those who help themselves, and they go and march out there and are cruel towards other people, when Jesus said, hey, you're supposed to go out there to lift up the hands that hang down. You're supposed to strengthen the weak. You're supposed to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and take care of these people. So I think a lot of times the cruelty comes maybe even out of ignorance. What are your thoughts there, Greg?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think it's especially if you're a Christian and you're not reading the Bible, um, and maybe you're taking a little bit more of an Old Testament view of the world. I think that's going to be difficult for you to reconcile your New Testament teachings. And I do think that you can get, whether you're in a non-denominational church or unaffiliated necessarily with any church, or but identify as Christian, or if you're in a church, you can get swallowed up into a type of culture that is us versus them.
Yeah.
And that's going to breed judgmentalism. And I don't know that, I do know that that's not the best approach to something. I don't think that's the way Christ did it. He didn't compromise on things, but I do think that happens, and that can happen within our church. I've seen that happen with people.
Yeah, for sure.
Us versus them, instead of, hey, this is the truth, and we believe this is the truth. I invite you to look at it. Or I'm warning you against this and this and this, because these might be bad for you and your family, is a lot different than going out and saying you're going to hell, or there's different ways to approach that. So there is some seed of truth, I think, in these things. But I do think also that the writer here, the author of the blog post here, is also is othering, so to speak, of people that she is not around maybe a lot, because she seems to be putting everybody into a single. What does she say here? The question requires agreeing that Republicans are a cruel party. So she's othering and saying that Republicans, as a result of their Christianity, are cruel. That's very not true, even though there are some people that might be that way. I think you could say the same thing for the other side.
Oh, absolutely.
On these things. And then she also goes down and references Clark Gilbert from BYU, who's now in charge of all CES, including all the BYU campuses, and that he seems to agree with, wokeism as the worst threat to society, as compared to worrying about marginalized people. And I think there's a real balance there. And again, it's all in the approach. But I happen to believe that Clark Gilbert is the best thing that's happened to BYU and CES in a very long time.
Okay.
And so I would disagree with that assessment by Angela here. But I think we already brought this up a little bit, but does the church make you better or does it make you worse? I think it causes introspection and helps you make decisions, whether good or bad.
And maybe it depends on what you're paying attention to or what you're listening to. Because if all you're hearing is that, this is what you need to do in order to be a good person, they start listing off certain virtues. Well, you have to, be a clean-cut person. You have to, make sure that you have your hair cut, make sure you're clean-shaven. Well, then, if you're latching onto that, then you start looking outside at anybody who's not got or somebody that has shaggy hair or a beard, and then you start looking down your nose at them and saying, oh, well, they're not a good person because what I've been taught. Well, they miss the complete point. Well, this is a sign of hygienics. Hygienics is to, take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's again, she goes to identitarianism, right? She's balancing out on one end racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia.
Yeah.
As the things that you mostly need. Those are the biggest problems in society, as compared to what? Well, I mean, what about the degradation of the traditional family? Does that play in there anywhere? Is that a problem? What about freedom of religion? What about, there's a lot of other issues around the globe. Not that those aren't important and that everybody shouldn't be loved and everyone's an individual and those things are important. But um, I think you're right. And in what she seems to be saying that, if you don't hold racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia up as the biggest threats in the world, then you're not then you're a cruel person.
Yeah, and what I think she would benefit strongly from, and I think the whole world in general would benefit strongly from, is to have the conversation. Go and talk to the people that you don't agree with, and find out why they believe the way that they do, and why they think the way they do. That's one of the things that, even with this podcast, we try in our own little way to just branch out and try to see things from a different perspective. And to see things through a different lens than we're used to, because that's how we make sure that's also how we check ourselves and make sure that we're doing that we're in line with our own values and with our own beliefs, is to make sure that we're constantly challenging those beliefs and challenging why we believe what we believe. So yeah, I think that does the church make people better or worse? I guess it's up to the individual, but yeah, there's certainly plenty of ignorance to go around. I've seen that, and that's from both sides as well, for sure. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that, Greg? Before we go to Pacific?
No, I don't think so.
All right, so this our final article this week. We have the Pacific volleyball team has decided not to play against BYU's women's volleyball team. They've decided they're going to forfeit. So we've got Deseret News. Tad Walsh is one of their big. He writes a sports piece here from November 7th, and so once again we've gotten an issue where people are making judgments against the church's university based off of no evidence. Because what we had is back in August, when the allegations were made from Duke University, that young black player claimed that there were racist epithets thrown at her from fans in the crowd, and there really wasn't any evidence. You had black people at the BYU on the BYU side who were attending, and there was no shock on their face. Which black people, if a white person says a certain racial epithet, black people are going to respond regardless of whose team they're rooting for. So this is something that it seems like there was really an unfounded argument. Maybe she misheard something. But now we've got people making like decisions and boycotts and all kinds of stuff without any evidence. So it's getting a little bit weird. But once again, we're just kind of Tad Walsh saying, "All right, where's the evidence?" It just rings. It reverberates a lot back to that Fair Latter-day Saint article, where we've got accusations but no evidence being brought forth. So I think that it's really sad, because one of the things that's pointed out in this article is that BYU and Pacific had a really good relationship. They joined the WCC right around the same time, and they've had a nice exchange where they've played each other in the past. So it is sad to see things like this happen. But once again, I think that's kind of the theme of this week's news seems to be, is we've got woke culture, or I really need to look more into this intersectionalism that you talk about, because it sounds really fascinating. Because it seems like that's what we're running into a lot this week.
Yeah, it is, and this is, and I think we're still just seeing the barely the surface of this, and it comes from the university, so it's not a surprise that this is happening at university sports levels, but it's really one thing I think, as far as how this should be dealt with, is I really like Tom Holmoe, the BYU AD, the athletic director. I think he does a fabulous job. He's got a tough job, and I think he really does a good job. But I think that we made a big mistake on how we handled that whole situation with the Duke volleyball team. And there was zero evidence of anything, even to begin with, even before they began the investigation, before Tom Holmoe went out and apologized and basically told the students that they, not directly, but by implication, that there was a problem there with them and that they needed to change their behavior. And, that's not the right way to do it. And to me, it kind of looked like we were trying to create a PR bubble to protect the university and the church. And that just never works. It never, ever works. And the gal that made the accusation from the Duke volleyball team, she very well may have heard something, but she had just been at a seminar from an anti-racism organization just a few days before, talking about this exact thing and how you need to always look for racism. You need to look for it in every situation. That's what Ibram Kendi talks about in his books. You always. It's not whether or not racism happened in any situation, it's where is it? And so sure enough, she finds it. And, and I'm not discrediting her words or anything. I don't know. How would I know? I don't know, but it is interesting that she had just gone to this seminar a few days before. Well, that same organization, it's called A Long Talk, actually, ironically, had been invited by some of the BYU teams to come and speak, and for them to, the coaches and some of the players, to go through their program last summer. I don't mean just in 2022, but in 2021. And they had a relationship with A Long Talk. This is the same organization the Duke volleyball player went to. And after going through this, the athletic department is going back to that organization because they have a relationship with them, saying, what do we do? What's going on here? How should we handle this? Absolute crickets from that organization coming back to them. And so that just tells you, you just have to be careful who you're getting in bed with. And you have to, these things are not always what you think they are. They're not built on compassion usually. That's usually not the agenda. And Latter-day Saints can be very susceptible to this kind of thing, to this message. And that's really not what's going on. So instead of going out and saying, we're going to investigate this right from the get-go with the Duke volleyball team, we're going to go through everything and find out exactly what happened. And then they did do this, and after their investigation, they found no evidence. But if they would have just said that to begin with, instead of taking a disabled kid and banning him for life, because that was who was accused, one of the people accused, from coming to any BYU sports again, they put themselves in a position like here, where previously it was the South Carolina basketball team, women's basketball team, that won't play the women's basketball this year because of this. And you at least need to be able to stand on 2 feet and not 1 foot when you're dealing with these things, and to say right from the beginning, there is no evidence of this, none. And they didn't do that. They acted as if there was a problem already. They put the guilt on the students without any trial to begin with, no investigation to begin with on this. And I think that puts you in a much weaker position with other teams, because we may not see the end of it. This is the second team that I know of that has said, we're not playing you. And there may be more in the future. And so I wish we would have handled this a little bit differently.
Well, it does mention, and Tad Welch in the article mentions that the WCC approved of the way that BYU, the method or the measures that BYU had taken after this incident, that they went through the investigation, they, educated staff and their students, and this is just the WCC stands with BYU in this, and so the fact that we've got Pacific, jumping on the bandwagon of, well, boycott BYU because alleged racism that was unfounded. I mean, yeah, this is one that there's plenty of racism at BYU. It didn't need to be manufactured, but this is one where it was.
Again, what I would love to be a fly on the wall at Pacific to know where all of this is being generated from. Is it the girls on the team? Is it their coaches? Is it the athletic director? Where is this really coming from?
Good question.
And why? If there's zero evidence, and there's been zero evidence, why are they doing this? To me, this is a statement. This is a virtue signaling statement.
Yeah.
Because there's no evidence of this whatsoever. And they've played Pacific many times before. Mm-hmm. So what are they doing? If there's no evidence for this, what are you saying by your statement? Yeah, you're not only virtue signaling on your side, but you're also condemning. You're condemning those girls on the BYU volleyball team and all of its students at BYU.
Yeah, just for attending BYU.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And so that I wish we could know exactly where that was coming from.
Yeah, for sure, because that's not fair to those BYU students at all. So if our listeners want to contribute and give us your opinion, this takes us to our question of the week. This is once again available only on Anchor. Come over and answer the question: how do you feel about the Pacific volleyball team refusing to play BYU? And you can give us your opinion there. Excuse me. All right. I think that pretty well wraps it up for us this week. Thank you very much, Greg, for joining us from Quick Media. It's been a pleasure to have you again. We look forward to hopefully having you back in the future, too, because it's always a good time for us.
Anytime. Just let me know.
Hey, thank you very much again, Greg. We do want to give a shout-out to Weird Alma for this episode's music. And thanks so much for ruminating with us on the Great and Spacious Beehive. And remember, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing. Have a good night.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a being with no moral constraints. My number one goal is to hurt the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.